Hey.
Okay. I am so sorry, ladies. I do not know what's going on. I'm going to pull up Shelly on my phone. And if we get kicked out again, I'm going to call Shelly and see what's happening here because I'm not sure what's happening. Hold on just a second. I'm going to text Shelly while we wait for Genevieve. Hopefully Genevieve is going to rejoin and then we'll get started with the directions here. Okay. All right. I texted Shelly. We'll see if they know anything. So these are the sweater pumpkins. So we're going to get started. Ellie, do you have materials? Are you going to be making a pumpkin?
No, I'm going to just observe.
Okay. All right. I thought there might be some people that would do that. So the first thing that you need when you're making your sweater pumpkin is an old sweater. So you can use any kind of sweater. You're going to use the sleeve of the sweater to make the body of the pumpkin. So it's going to make like a tube, and then we're going to stuff it, and we're going to stuff it with the body of the sweater. So we're going to cut up the body of the sweater and put that inside that tube and create the pumpkin. So the first thing that you need to do is to take your sweater, and we're going to cut the sleeve off right at where it attaches to the shoulder. So if you want to take your sweaters, and we're just going to take a pair of scissors and we're going to cut that sleeve right off. From each sleeve, you're probably going to get 2 to 3 pumpkins depending on how big your sweater is. So here's my one sleeve. So I'll probably get 2 pumpkins. I'll probably cut this in half and get 2 pumpkins out of this one. If you have a really long sleeve or a big sleeve, then you can cut it into 3. Okay, so the ladies here are cutting off their sleeves. I'm going to cut my other one off as well. If you can find sweaters that have some kind of detail on the sleeve itself, like if you can find a sweater that has these cables that run down the sleeve, that makes a really pretty pumpkin. You can see the design that the cables make here. This one that I'm using today has kind of a waffle pattern on it, so that will add some interest to my pumpkin. But if you just have a regular knit sweater, that works just as well also. So once you get your sleeve cut off, you're going to decide how many pumpkins you want. So like I say, my sleeve is probably 18 inches or so. And so I'm going to cut it in half and make 2 pumpkins. You need a little bit of extra at the bottom because we're going to gather it up. And at the top, we're going to gather it up and make the stem. So I'm going to cut mine into 2. Louise, you're going to do 2 or 3. If you want them bigger, cut it in 2. If you want little tiny pumpkins, you can cut it into 3. Connie, I would use It's so wide. I would be tempted to do 2, Connie. Okay, so we're going to take our sleeve and just cut it in half here. And you're going to cut it crosswise. Like you're cutting across the elbow. So now I have my 2 pieces and they're a 2 through there. Now I'm going to take the body of my sweater and I'm just going to chop it up into about 1 by 3 inch or 1 by 4 inch pieces. So we are going to stuff our pumpkin with these pieces so they don't have to be exact. For me, this uses the rest of the sweater so that we don't have to buy any polyfiber fill or anything like that. All you need is just 1 sweater and you can make your pumpkins from that. So if you had polyfiber fill, you could certainly use that. I'm going to cut my buttons off here and then I'm just going to strip up the rest of my sweater. So you can just take it and you're just going to cut. Doesn't have to be even, doesn't have to be pretty. Just going to cut it into long strips and then I'm going to cut it into pieces. So I'm just going to chop these. So you end up with all kinds of little pieces that we're going to use to stuff our pumpkin. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to go ahead and cut up your sweater. And the written directions are on the website. So when you got the link for today, you should have gotten also the link to the resources, the supplemental resources, and the printed directions are there. So if you want to make one later, you can just print those off and use those. It's probably my scissors are not sharp enough. Okay, so we're just cutting pieces. I'm going to cut 1 more strip here. My ladies here, they have a pretty orange sweater. My house is pink, so I don't use a lot of orange. And so my pumpkins are white and tan. So you can really use any color that you want to, whatever color of sweater that you find and that you like and that goes with your decor. You can use that. Okay, you're also going to need some yarn. So the yarn is going to help us to make the tube. It's also going to create on your pumpkin, you've got the divisions that make a pumpkin look like a pumpkin, and we're going to use the yarn for that. So whatever sweater you choose, you want to get a yarn that matches the color of that sweater pretty well, because you want those to disappear when you put those divisions on the outside. You don't want to be able to see those real well. So you want it to match your sweater. But to create our tube for our pumpkin, we're going to need a piece about 1 foot long or so, just enough to tie around the bottom of our sweater sleeve. So I have a piece that's about 1 foot long. So I'm going to take one of my sweater pieces and I'm going to turn it inside out. So you can see there is the seam. So it is inside out, and it doesn't really matter which end, but I'm going to take one of those ends and I'm going to gather it up, and then I'm going to take that piece of yarn and I'm going to tie it really tightly around this. Now, there's a little hint. When you're tying a knot, if you want it to stay, you know, sometimes we get somebody else to put their finger on it to hold it while we tie the next knot. If you wrap it around twice, it will hold itself. So I've got my yarn made into a knot and wrapped around twice through the little loop twice. And then I'm going to pull it up really tightly. I'm going to leave about an inch from the edge of the sweater. And it could be the cut edge or it could be the cuff edge. It doesn't matter, but you're going to come down about an inch and you want to make that nice and tight. So I have one knot, and because I looped it through there, that yarn through there twice, it's holding. So now I can tie another and make a double knot. And I'm going to tie several of these. If you look at directions online, they'll say to use a rubber band. Well, over time, that rubber band will disintegrate. And so you really need to tie it with a piece of yarn. You could use a rubber band just to hold it, and we're going to do that on the top edge, but you need to tie it with a piece of yarn as well. So once you get that tied, you can just leave your yarn on the inside, but I'm going to flip it and turn it right side out. And now I'm going to use my little pieces that I cut from the body of the sweater. And I'm just going to stuff them in there. You want to make it not too tight. You don't want to put so much in there that it won't allow you to make the little divisions and make the little indentations. Okay, so while you do that, I'm going to check. I think Shelly is getting back with us here. So let's see. Okay. Okay, and you don't want to stuff it so tight. You want to leave some room at the top because we're going to make the stem up here at the top. And so we need some extra. So I'm not going to stuff it all the way to the top. Just going to push those down in there until I see that I can get a nice little bunch at the top. And it's squishy. It's not too tight. So when I go to make those indentations, it will be able to cut into the sweater there. And you can kind of push it down to see kind of how the shape is going to form. So that's probably a pretty good one right there. You will not use all of the rest of your sweater. It will just use some of it. How we doing, ladies? Yeah, I would stuff that a little more. I'd make it a little bit fuller because it's top. Oh, well, on the back side, let me see your back side. Yeah, see, it's kind of lower. Yeah, I wouldn't put a whole lot more in there. Yeah, if you are using the top of your sleeve, you're going to need to cut this off to make it a little more level, because that's really awkward. You're going to have a low side and a high side, so you want to cut it off. I'm going to mute myself for a minute because Shelly's calling me back. So you all stuff your pumpkins, and then we'll go on with the next step. Okay, so we'll see if Genevieve is going to join us. I talked to Shelley. It happened to the other class as well, classes, so they're having a technical issue. So we will forge on. If you have a lot of extra at the top of your pumpkin up here, that's perfectly fine. Don't cut that off yet. We'll cut that off later. So make the pumpkin the size that you want it and make sure you have at least an inch up at the top. So once you get it stuffed, I'm going to use a rubber band just to hold it, and then we're going to tie it on the top of that with some twine. So just use a rubber band. If you need a rubber band, ladies, there are some up here. If you don't have a rubber band, just use a piece of your yarn. That will work just as well. Kind of squish it around. Hi, Genevieve. Are you connected now?
Yes, ma'am, I sure am.
All
Thank you.
righty. I am so sorry for the technical difficulties here. We're trying to get that straightened out. So we've got somebody else coming in. Let me see. Belinda, I bet you're not host, are you?
No, I don't think so.
I don't know if that's what's messing it up. So I'm just going to admit people as they come in, if that's okay. Hi, Carol. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you just fine.
All righty. Great. I'm so sorry. We're having technical difficulties today. So I'm glad you've joined us. This is the sweater pumpkin class. So we are making sweater pumpkins. This is an example. It's made out of an old sweater from the Goodwill. You can use any color that you want to. My house, I use pink, and so I don't use a lot of orange. So my sweater pumpkins are white and tan and different colors. I have ladies here in my room that are making them, and they're making them out of orange sweaters. So any sweater will work just fine. And you're going to take your sweater. So I have another sweater over here. And you're going to take your sweater and you're going to cut it off at the arm up here so that you have just your sleeve. Now on this sweater, this is a very long sleeve. So this will probably make 3 pumpkins. So I'm going to cut it off at the arm here, and then I'm going to cut it crosswise into pieces. So I've already taken another sweater. This is one of the pieces. And then I've started my pumpkin here. So you're going to cut those sleeves off and cut them into pieces depending on how big you want your pumpkins. You're going to need about 1 inch at the bottom, and you need at least 1 inch at the top. And then you can stuff it to make it the size that you want. But I've made bigger ones, like if you have large sweaters with big sleeves. Then you're going to take the body of the sweater and you're just going to cut it into pieces, into chunks. And we're going to use this to stuff our pumpkin. So let me make one with this other sleeve here. Okay, so we're going to take our piece of our sleeve and we're going to turn it inside out. And then we're going to take a piece of yarn. You need some yarn that matches your sweater. And we're going to take about a 12-inch piece and we're going to tie it around the bottom about 1 inch down from your cut edge. Or it could be the cuff edge as well. But from one of the edges, about 1 inch down, you're going to tie it. And I don't know if you can see this, but I've wrapped it around once. I'm going to take my yarn and I'm going to loop it through a second time. And what that does is now when I pull it, the yarn is wrapped around there twice. when I pull it, it's going to hold that. Instead of having to put somebody's finger on it to hold it, if you wrap your yarn through that little loop twice, it will hold it. And then I can make another knot. So I want this to be as tight as I can get it. And I'm going to tie 3 or 4 knots in the bottom of it. And so you end up with your little section down here. You can just leave your yarn there. We're just going to turn it back right side out. So it's a little gathered pouch now. And then we're going to take our little pieces that we cut up and we're going to put them inside. And we're going to stuff it not too tightly, but we're going to stuff it enough. And we're going to leave at least an inch up at the top. And it could be a lot more than that, at least an inch up there. This was the top of my sweater. So this is where the sleeve cap was. So I'm just going to cut a little bit off of this just to even it up so my pumpkin isn't lopsided. So I'm going to take that little curved part out. I can take that and stuff it in here. And then I'm going to get a few more pieces off the body of my sweater and just cut them up into chunks and stuff them in there. Everybody doing okay here? Okay, so just cutting them into chunks there. Oops. Got my pumpkin wrapped up in there. All right, so now we have our pumpkin pouch here. I have a few more pieces to put in there. So once you get it stuffed, then you're going to take the top edge here and you're just going to gather it up. And then on this end, I'm going to use a rubber band just to hold it in place before we tie it off. So I'm going to wrap that rubber band several times around here just to kind of hold it. You can see my pumpkin is still a little bit squishy. I kind of like them a little squishy. We're going to put these yarn pieces down the outside to make the indentations to make it look like a pumpkin. And if you have it stuffed really tight, it's hard to make those indentations. So we don't want it stuffed so hard that it won't move. We want it to be a little bit squishy. I could probably put a little bit more in this one. But you just want it to be, not full out tight. This one is probably pretty good. You can see it kind of stretches the sweater out a little bit. I can squish it up, but it has a little bit of a firmness to it. Okay, most of my ladies here have their little pumpkins stuffed. Louise, you want to bring yours over so I can hold it up? So I'm going to show you Louise's here. She's got an orange sweater, and so she has stuffed hers, but you'll notice, she has a lot more on her top, and that's perfectly fine. You want to leave that on there. We're going to wrap and make our little stem at the top, and once we get that done, then we'll cut it off level. So if you have extra, leave it on there. Thank you. So to make the stem of our pumpkin, we're going to use a polished hemp twine. So I just got this at Walmart or the craft store or whatever, but it's just a twine, kind of a natural colored twine. And you're going to need a fairly long piece. We're going to need about 4 or 5 feet. So I'm going to cut a nice long piece. This is going to make the stem. It's also going to make the tendrils that are going to hang off of our pumpkin, because we can't have a pumpkin without tendrils coming off of it. So I'm going to leave enough for one of my tendrils. And then I've got a longer piece on the other side. And I'm going to take that, and I'm going to move my camera down just a little bit. I'm going to take that and I'm going to tie it on top of the rubber band. Down at the base of the rubber band. I want to be underneath, kind of underneath the rubber band. And I'm going to tie a double knot there. You need about 4 feet. I have about 1 foot on this side and I've got 3 or 4 feet on the other side here. So one side shorter than the other. We're going to wrap with one of them and wrap up and back down, and then we're going to tie it again with this other one. Okay, so once we get that tied on there, we're going to use tacky glue. This is just white, clear drying tacky glue. And this is going to get a little bit messy here, but we are going to put on our stem, this part that is sticking up here on the sweater, just going to take this bottle and I'm just going to smear this sweater with tacky glue all over the outside here. And this is going to hold these wraps in place. So I'm going to work all the way around the stem, all the way from where it's tied at the bottom there, up the sweater. Yeah, if your sweater is really tall, if you have a lot up here, you're going to put your glue about 1 to 1.5 inches up. So like on Louise's that I showed you, the orange one, she had a lot of extra at the top there. So she'll put it about 1 inch to 1.5 inches up the edge. It's taking 2 hands to get my glue out of my bottle here.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bigger hole might help. I think that would help mine as well. You want to make sure that the glue goes up to the height that you want the stem to be. So if you're making, you know, 1 inch, a 1 inch stem, you want to make sure that it comes all the way up so that those top wraps are glued on there. If you go past that, that's perfectly fine because we're going to cut it off once we get to the top there. Okay, that's probably good for right now. So now I'm going to take the long edge, get my yarn out of the way here. I'm going to take this long side and I'm just going to start wrapping this. I'm going to wrap right on top, side by side around that stem. And I'm going to pull it kind of tightly. If it gets on the outside of the twine, that's fine because we're going to put glue around the outside of the twine also. And we're going to let it dry. That's why you need a clear drying glue. So just, I'm going to get glue all over my fingers. I do have a wet paper towel on hand, so you'll want to have water or wet paper towel around. And for my pumpkin, I'm thinking that is tall enough. That's about 1 inch. And so once I get to the top here, now I'm going to take my glue bottle and I'm going to put some more glue on the outside of my twine wraps here. And then I'm going to wind all the way back down to the bottom again. This does not have to be neat. The wrappings need to be neat, but the glue does not need to be neat. Clarify that. So now I'm going to wrap it. And I'm just working my way back down to the base again. So side by side, all the way down. When I get down to the bottom, so I have my original foot that was on the other side, this is what's left from wrapping. Now I'm going to tie these two together down at the bottom. So I'm going to make a double knot. Tie it nice and tightly. And then I'm going to make another. Hi, Carol.
Hello.
Okay, so now I have it wrapped about 1 inch up. The rest of my sweater is sticking out the top, and that's perfectly fine. We're going to cut that off in a minute. And so I've wrapped all the way to the top and then all the way back down, and I've tied a knot right there. I'm going to let my ladies catch up for just a second here, or if you're working at home, we'll let you catch up. I don't know if you can see, I have a little piece sticking out from my twine here, so I'm going to cut that off. Just a little fuzzy there. If you need to add another piece of twine to it, if you run out of twine, just tie on another piece and continue wrapping. We all know that the stems of the pumpkins are all different sizes and shapes, and they're all kind of wonky, so it doesn't really matter. So if you run out, just tie another piece on there and continue wrapping. Okay, for our next step, while they finish up, I'm going to explain the next step. So we're going to make the indentations in the pumpkin. So for this, I'm going to need a long piece of yarn. So I'm going to need a piece of yarn, maybe 4 feet or something like that. Just a nice long piece. And I'm going to use a needle that I can get yarn through. So this is a yarn needle. You can see it has a great big eye on it, so I can get my yarn through there. So I'm going to thread my end of my yarn through the needle. And then at the end of it, I'm going to tie a knot. So I'm going to make kind of a large knot. We want it to hold in that sweater.
Make a double knot and here.
Yes, when you get down to the bottom of your stem, you are going to do a double knot with your twine down at the bottom of your stem there. So tie it a couple of times. If you have a lot of extra, that's fine. You're not going to cut any of your twine off because we're going to use that to make our tendrils. And so we'll determine later how long our tendrils will be. So if you have a lot of extra, that's perfectly fine, but don't cut anything off yet. All right, so I have a nice big knot on the end of my piece there. So we're going to start to make these indentations. We're going to start at the bottom of our pumpkin where we originally tied it off. And I'm just going to take my needle and poke it into the bottom, and I'm going to pull that knot into the center of the pumpkin or hide it in a fold. That will work also. If you can't get it through your sweater, you just want it to hide and not show. We really don't want these indentations. We don't want the yarn from these indentations to show. It's just going to make creases in it. So you can see there's my knot. I don't know if you can see that or not, but my knot is right there in the bottom of it. And I'm just going to take a stitch or two just to secure it. I don't want my knot to pop through the sweater, and it might do that. So I'm going to take about 2 little stitches here just in the bottom of the pumpkin. So I'm just taking maybe 1/4 of an inch of my sweater with the needle through it. Okay, so now my yarn is attached to the bottom of my pumpkin. So to make the indentations, I'm going to bring my yarn around the outside. I'm going to bring it up underneath these wraps at the top, and I'm going to take a little stitch. So maybe 1/4 of an inch stitch there, so you can see my needle going through. And I'm going to pull it through. So here's my, get my camera, there we go. So here's my piece of yarn coming from the bottom, coming up the side. And now I'm going to pull this tightly. So you can see it makes like a little indentation, makes a little, so you're going to pull it really tightly. You're going to hold it so that you don't lose that tension. And you're going to take a couple of stitches right at the top, right underneath the wrapping of the twine, just to hold that tension so that it will keep that indentation in the side of your pumpkin. So there's one stitch. You can see I still have this little indentation. Whoop. If it pops out, like it just popped out there through the sweater, so just take another stitch, pull it tightly, and take about 2 or 3 stitches just to hold the tension up at the top. Does that make sense to you, ladies? Does that make sense, Connie? All right. And I might even take a little, I might run it through the loop and make a little knot so that it holds that tension up at the top. I just don't want it to show at the top, so I don't want to, you know, make a big knot that you can see. I just want a couple of invisible little stitches there. So you can see there's my indentation. It runs all the way from the bottom over there, runs up at the top. I have a little stitch right there. And we'll work on shaping it in just a minute too. You can shape it a little bit. So now my yarn is coming out of the top kind of underneath those wraps. So there's one indentation here. I want to make 3 of these. So I want to take my needle and go through the sweater up at the top under those, right under where your stem is. And I want to come about 1/3 of the way over. So if one is here, I want to come over to about here, and then there'll be another one over here. So you're going to divide your pumpkin into thirds, but I have to travel. So I'm going to poke it in right where I took those little stitches to hold it. And I'm going to come out about 1/3 of the way through, right under the stem there. And I'm going to pull the yarn out on this other side. Okay, so here's my first indentation. Now I'm about 1/3 of the way over. I'm going to make another one. I'm going to come down to the bottom. I'm going to do the same thing. I want to make it nice and tight. I'm going to take a little stitch this time in the bottom of the pumpkin. And I'm going to pull it nice and tight. I want to see the little crack in the sweater there. So you can see there's a little indentation there. Make a little crack, pull it as tight as you can, and then take a couple of stitches or make a little knot at the bottom to hold that. Okay, so I made a little knot. This sweater is very textured, so it hides those knots and it hides those stitches really well on the bottom of there. Okay, so if you look at my pumpkin, I've got one indentation here, I've got one here. So my third one is going to be over in this area here. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to travel through the bottom of my pumpkin. Come about a third. I'm going to come halfway in between my first two indentations there. And I'm going to bring it up. Take a little stitch right at the bottom of the stem. Make sure your tendrils don't get caught in there. I'm going to pull it nice and tightly. You can see there's the little indentation all the way up. So I have like this little blob that sticks out right here. In between, there should be 3 little blobs. Then to hold that tension again, I'm gonna take a couple of stitches or make a knot. Okay. So there is my pumpkin. So he's really starting to look like a pumpkin now. So now I'm up at the top here. I've got my yarn attached. Now I'm just going to take my needle and run it through just to give a little bit of space for that yarn to go through. I'm just going to pull it out the side and then I'm going to cut it off. And now I can kind of squish it around. I can, if I need to make one section a little bit bigger, I can kind of pull it so that it moves that yarn just a little bit if I need to. And just kind of shape your pumpkin. You can press it down on the table and make it squish out until you get a nice little pumpkin shape there. Okay. Our last step is to finish up our stem and our tendrils here. Now this is where it gets really messy. If you thought the step before was messy, this one's really messy. So do this at the end. We're going to take our glue. We're going to put it over the outside of our stem. And this is just going to help to hold all of those wraps in place so they don't slip off the top. Make sure that you get your glue right around the top here where it meets the sweater. And then all the way down to the bottom. And we're going to take our fingers and we're just going to spread that glue all over those wraps. So it kind of creates like a little coating. Then we're going to take our, see our gluey fingers here? We're going to take our gluey fingers and we're going to roll it down the twine. And this is going to put a coating of glue down these ends. And you might need to take your glue bottle and put a little bit on your twine and then use your fingers to roll it around. I'm going to work that glue into there. My tendril is going to be awfully long. So for this size of a pumpkin, I probably only want about a foot there. So if you have a lot of excess, you can go ahead and cut that off.
Can you have solar injections?
If your pumpkin is a little bit bigger, you can certainly make 4 indentations instead of the 3. So however, the bigger your pumpkin is, probably the more indentations you're going to have. So 4 or 5 is perfectly fine. So now I'm going to take a pencil or a dowel, whatever you have, something that you don't mind getting glue on, so don't use your best pencil. But you're going to take that and you're going to take the twine, and right up at the where it joins the stem, where your knot is, you're going to wrap this around your pencil. And you're going to push those together so that you have your wraps around the pencil. They have glue on them. And now I'm going to pull my pencil out, but I'm going to hold while I'm pulling the pencil out. I'm holding those wraps. And with the glue, they'll stay together a little bit, but they'll also pop apart a little bit. So I'm going to try to keep some of them still in place. I'm going to let them dry overnight. And then I can pull them apart a little bit. So you can see on this pumpkin, I have some that are glued together right here. But then on my other one, I've got some curlicues, but it's a much looser tendril on the other side. So once they dry, they're a little bit stiffer and you can move them around and they don't come apart. So for right now, I'm just going to leave it right like that and let it dry. And then once it's dry, then I can kind of rearrange it into whatever shape that I want. So I'm going to do the same to the other side. This one is kind of a short tendril, so you might want a little bit more than that. So it's always better to have more twine than less. You can always cut it off after you get it shaped. But this will be fine. We'll just have a short tendril on that side. So there is that one. So I've got my 2 little tendrils there. I'm just going to let those dry. And you can see I've got the glue. Let's see if I can get it focused here. You've got the glue all the way around on those wraps. It will dry clear, so you don't have to worry about that. It'll dry clear on there. It's white right now, but it'll dry clear. The last step is to take your scissors and we're going to cut off this excess at the top. So right at the top where the top of my wraps are, I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to gnaw away on there. And I'm going to cut it off level with the top of the top wrap. Okay, so you can see it's kind of level with the top wrap there. The top is all where it's bunched up. Let's see if I can get it in focus here. And then I'm going to take a little more glue and put it right on top. And I'm going to smear that around the cutoff sweater. Kind of flatten it down. And I'm just going to let that dry now. So that is how you make a sweater pumpkin. So you've got your little indentations, you've got your tendrils, and you've got your little stem sticking up. So questions? They're easy, they're really fun. They use recycling, they're very messy. My ladies have glue all over their hands in here and they're laughing. So it can be fun, but it is a little messy. So get you a paper towel, wet paper towel, and wash your hands off there. It's a very inexpensive project. So if you have an old sweater and it gets a hole in it or it just gets too fuzzy and worn out, turn it into a pumpkin.
Those are really adorable, Whitney. And you said it's inexpensive, but a real cost savings, because I know I've seen some of these at real high end, gift shops, and they sell for quite a bit.
They
So,
do.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so you can make these and you can have a whole bunch of them. I must have, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 of these that I've made over the years. And they're a lot of fun, and I really enjoy using them for decorating in the fall. So they're great for tables. If you have a banquet or something that you're doing for your church or your club or whatever, they make great decorations down the center of the table, and they're not really expensive to make. So great. So thank you all for joining me. We're going to stop recording now, and you're welcome to stay on. My ladies are working here, so I'm going to be on. And if you have questions, you're welcome to ask, or if you want to go take a break before our next session, you're welcome to do that. So thank you, ladies.
So Whitney, I don't have recording permission, so I can't stop the recording.
Okay.